Like to introduce, or I'll start over again. Welcome, everyone, to our Cultural Awareness Seminar today. Grateful to have you all with us. I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Our guest is Khan Bouba-Dalambaye, a mental health practitioner and consultant born and raised in Côte-des-Neiges. He's a graduate of McGill University, and he holds a master's degree in counseling psychology. He has a decade of experience working as a high school guidance counselor and clinical counselor, and he's taught at the CEGEP level and consults in diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. He is a co-facilitator for the Black Wellness Center's support group for Black men, and his practice is focused on supporting adolescents, young adults, the BIPOC community, and the Black community in particular by offering support that is solution-focused and culturally relevant. He'll be presenting today on material that will focus on the necessity of broaching the topics of culture, race, racism, and discrimination when working with Black clients. It will look at his presentation will look at how sense of belonging influences how Black clients can show up within therapy, the reasons behind the importance of health professionals having the ability and willingness to broach these issues with their clients, and provide examples of language that can be used when talking about these issues. So, with a very warm welcome, I turn the time over to Mr. Khan Buba Dalambaya, and you have until as long as you want until noon. But if you leave some time at the end, we'll have some questions for you. So it's
Fair,
it's really
fair.
up to you. You're the one. You're the boss.
Way too much power. Okay. Thank you everybody for showing up. I really appreciate this. This work, as Dr. Darbs has said, so this is a part of my life's work and a passion project as well. So, full context, as you'll see by the title page, what I'm presenting today is actually a portion of a training that I've designed specifically for mental health practitioners and extends as well to health professionals. And it's an introduction, as you see, to working with Black clients. And so I've been fortunate enough to be able to run this for a number of years, in particular with McGill University. And today I took one of the topics for the sessions that we focus on, which is the idea and the topic of approaching racism, culture with, in particular, when working with your Black clients. Okay, so let me just. So I'll start off just with their duty and responsibilities as clinicians or professionals or health professionals as a whole, just to kind of emphasize the importance and as well the necessity for doing this work. And so when I focus on our responsibilities and our duties, I start off ethically. And I think that what's related and connected to broachings as well, our responsibility to be able to create and sustain an environment where our clients, our Black clients, feel safe and feel welcomed as well. Not only to bring the entirety of themselves, but also the entirety of their lived experiences, which, for the most part, given that we live in a Western society or Eurocentric society, oftentimes those lived experiences do include experiences of discrimination, racism, or whether it be in overt and explicit forms, or just the fact that we continually exist in systems of oppression and systemic and institutionalized racism as well. And so I think when we talk about our work as health professionals or as clinicians, it's important to kind of reground ourselves in our ethical responsibility and duty to provide care and appropriate care to our clients. This also talks about the importance as well, obviously, of cultural competence, so the skills and the knowledge required to provide appropriate and culturally authentic and relevant care, um, as well as our cultural humility, so the ongoing process of seeing how do attitudes, values, beliefs, and biases potentially show up in the room, influence the way that we work, and in particular, influence the way that we work with our Black clients. I think beyond that as well, and when it comes to not just working with Black clients, specifically with the topic of broaching, um, I think it's also about we all need to have an honest relationship with ourselves in terms of um, our level of readiness or our level of fit to take on the responsibility of appropriate care for our Black clients. And so it's not a question about whether or not somebody is ready or whether or not somebody has done the work. I think it's more about the honesty. If the work hasn't been done, then yes, it's important to start doing it. But if that knowledge doesn't exist, or if there isn't a comfort, willingness, and ability to broach those topics, then I kind of turn us back to our ethical code and responsibility to do no harm. And there's what's important, and you'll see that'll be explained and articulated in today's conversation, is the fact that oftentimes the avoidance of broaching, not always, but oftentimes that isn't fueled by malice or an intent to do harm. But in the same way that it's an avoidance of whether it's a discomfort or harm to the client or to the clinician or health professional themselves, not broaching inevitably does create a harm for your clients, whether that's a fresh wound or the perpetuance of what they've already experienced within society. What I always tell my clients, what I always say in my presentations, the therapy room is a microcosm of society. We understand that we are a collection of our experiences in which we bring into the room. And so the best way to kind of explain it is, I know for myself professionally, I know for a lot of professionals as well, whether or not we take on a client is largely determined on whether or not we feel we're an appropriate fit, whether or not we feel we have the skills, knowledge, or comfort to be able to take on that client appropriately and meet their needs and provide the best quality of care. And without a willingness or an ability to approach, I would argue that that responsibility to provide that care becomes hindered and impaired. And it's also the importance of being honest about that and recognizing it. In the same way, we may not take on certain clients until we have a certain level of education or training. My argument and what I'm encouraging and urging is that the same type of energy or thought be applied when working with Black clients. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And what I forgot to mention is, yes, there'll be a Q and A at the end, but stylistically for my presentations, it's dynamic and it's a back and forth. If you have a story you want to share, an experience, or you have a question for clarification, or even a challenge, put your hand up, unmute yourself, and say something. I think the back and forth flow is way better for everybody, and individually, it's the best way that you're going to learn and take something that you specifically need.
I will add something in then, because you mentioned that clinicians choose their clients to some based on commonalities, but I'd say it goes the other way as well.
Hmm.
Clients choose us, and we're constantly under evaluation by our clients about whether we're going to fit to them and their needs.
Absolutely.
It's a bilateral kind of thing, and I think it's so important to keep it in mind. This choosing
And
goes on.
sorry, and piggyback offing that as well, like if we're being honest about the landscape of health professionals or mental health professionals here, North America, Canada, Montreal, Quebec specifically, the vast majority the vast majority don't look like your Black clients. Like there's a scarcity of Black health and mental health professionals within Montreal. Even more so when you're looking at the Anglophone side, right? To give you an example to kind of let it hit home, as far as I know, in terms of Black male identifying Anglophone mental health professionals, I believe I'm one of 5 or 6 that exist currently in the greater Montreal area. And so you see chances are that Black clients will not be working with a professional from their community. And like Dr. Jarvis so perfectly articulated, that's as well. Sometimes our clients choose us, but sometimes as well as our clients don't have the privilege of absolute choice in terms of that connection, that relatability, the ability to identify so readily with their clinician or their professional. And so I think because of that, I would argue that the onus and the responsibility is on us to bridge that gap. And I'll explain some of those reasons as I move forward. So, the other thing as well that we understand, there's an inherent power dynamic in our work. I think just as us as professionals and the professional client relationship creates that inherent power dynamic. For your Black clients, it's even further amplified. So when you take into account social location, societal race dynamics, and race relations, when you take into account the fact that the Black community exists sorry, the Black community is one of many marginalized and or oppressed communities as well within society, you understand that that power dynamic is amplified. And then there's more aspects to it. So briefly, if I use the term racial socialization, does everybody here know what that means? Yes, no? Okay, so really briefly, the way that I explain it is oftentimes one way of explaining it is it's the talk for Black people. And essentially, what it is that racial socialization are the messages, lessons, strategies that are passed down intergenerationally within the Black community, amongst other marginalized or racialized communities, whether that's from parents and elders, or as well as senior members within the community. And essentially, what it is the introduction of both not just race, but racism, explaining the dichotomy of how race or Black culture is viewed, appreciated, and valued within the community versus outside in larger society, which I mentioned before is Eurocentric. And so, oftentimes, racial socialization gives the lessons, the tools, the strategies of how to navigate certain situations. Talk with the police is part of racial socialization. And another part of it as well is how to navigate interactions with authority figures who exist outside of the community. We as professionals constitute an authority figure. And so also understanding that based on what is the lessons, the strategies that are given, it might not only amplify the power dynamic, but also might reduce your client's willingness to broach themselves those topics. There's also, when you look at the inherent vulnerability required from our clients to do the work, right? That also as well can amplify the power dynamic. Lack of familiarity with mental health or the process of therapy as a whole, as and when you consider the fact that mental health is still largely stigmatized within the Black community, it is not considered authentic or an authentic form of healing or wellness within the Black community. All those things are changing as well. All these things can amplify that inherent power dynamic. And then finally, the notion of bias, right? And when I talk about bias, it's on both ends. We as the professionals, your clients as well, right? Your clients will be coming in, whether it's through lived experience or vicarious experience, the messages, the images that they've seen that may influence or will likely influence whether or not they feel safe within that room, how comfortable they feel, influencing sense of belonging as well, in terms of the fact that it's in an authentic space and it's unfamiliar, or a lot of your clients at times have to leave the places that they feel the greatest sense of belonging because sharing with their loved ones or members of the community that they're accessing mental health services can also lead to questioning or criticism or isolation or alienation as well. And so I think a lot of this gets covered a little bit more in the larger training, but I want to kind of contextualize what it is that I'm trying to explain, and then understanding why for your clients it may be so difficult to talk about certain topics, as well as the fact that in that racial socialization process, a lot of Black clients, a lot of us have been instructed or told or experienced that it's risky or unsafe to talk about racism or discrimination outside of the community, or in a larger sense, outside of a racialized or BIPOC community where that shared and lived experience leads to a certain level of understanding and empathy as well. Does that make sense to everybody? I don't see everyone obviously, but if you have any questions or comments, I'll just leave a little bit of space for you to kind of say something before I move on. Okay, I think we're good. So, reasons why it can be difficult. Um, you know what? Here, I'm gonna take Dr. Jarvis on what he said, and can you all see me now? Yeah, is it more clear?
Mhm.
Okay, so stylistically as well, what I if it's all right with everybody, what I like to do as well is kind of share some personal stories, and it's not an opportunity to kind of put myself on a platform. It's more for to deepen the understanding of what it is that I'm talking about. So I hope that that's okay with everybody. Um, I'm gonna share a story it's about me and what I experienced during the pandemic, specifically with the murder of George Floyd. And what had happened was when people ask me about like that time and what it was for me, what I often describe to them is that period was marked the most for me by heartbreak. And what the reason why I say that is at a time when the world stopped and everybody was focused and concentrated on the wellness, well-being, and subsequent needs of the Black community because of what was going on. And I would notice that whether it was performative or genuine, virtually everybody was making a comment. Everybody was saying and acknowledging it. And the heartbreak for me was that um, the a lot of the majority of my friends are white or white passing. And what the heartbreak was for me is that in that time, no one reached out. No one asked if I was okay. No one talked about it. No one addressed it. No one acknowledged that. And that carried a really deep wound, which is why I described the heartbreak. And to this day, it's left an impact, not just on me, but the value and the value and importance of those relationships, my expectations of their ability to meet my needs, the way in which I show up and engage. And I bring this up not to kind of just share a difficult story. It's more about the idea of that's an example where broaching or talking about, bridging the topics of how I exist, my identity, my experience, or my life wasn't done, and the subsequent damage that was created. Now, I made the decision that they are still my friends, they are still in my life, but there is kind of a recalibration of the relationships. And why I bring this to you today and I share it in the presentation is because you might not get that opportunity. Statistics show that at least 50% of all Black clients engaging in therapy in a cross-racial dyad will terminate after the first session. 50, at least 50% will terminate after the first session. And this is not because a cross-racial dyad cannot work. It is because what is done or not done within that dyad or that relationship. One of the primary reasons, anywhere from it was 63, no, it was just under 60 to 83% of all racialized individuals within therapy have experienced at least one form of microaggression or overt racism. And I bring this up because what's also important to understand is regardless of the reason, not broaching the topics of race, racism, racial identity, culture, discrimination is in and of itself a microaggression, is in and of itself a form of harm or potentially a form of trauma if you understand racial trauma or race-based traumatic stress. And that's what's important. And I bring it back to the responsibility that we accepted and we have to uphold in terms of the appropriate and quality of care for our clients, as well as our responsibility and duty to do no harm or to reduce it as much as possible. You are not adhering to that ethical responsibility if you are not broaching the topic of race and racism, so on and so forth, with your Black clients. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
Okay.
Doesn't make
So,
sense. I think that for a lot of clinicians, they're just, we can discuss what we can do to make our clinical spaces safer
mhm.
and more accepting and more acceptable, you know? That's an important topic, important discussion. Maybe today will, but I think a lot of clinicians are just so uncomfortable around the issue of racism. They're worried that it will off-put their clients. They're worried they might be perceived themselves as being racist. They're worried about all these different things. So I think it's a real and a very important discussion.
You're you're absolutely right, Dr. Jarvis, and we're going to explore the reasons why it's difficult both for the professional and as well for the client. Um, I'm going to invite if anybody is willing though, because when I do this training, it's intended to be engaging and to be a little bit a little uncomfortable, right? Because that's how we grow. We grow with what's outside of us. We grow in that discomfort. We understand that as clinicians or health professionals as well. And so, what I often just ask if anybody's willing to share is not in terms of judgment or criticism, but like Dr. Jarvis said, like, why is it difficult? Right? It's one of the questions that I asked my friends in the story that I shared. Like, I had honest, raw conversations with them of just like, you know who I am. I've always been clear about my identity, the importance of it. I've never shied away from these topics. I'm supposed to be a best friend and some of you like virtual like brother. And in that moment when was easiest, you didn't meet my needs. You didn't see me. And if there's anybody who wants to share, why is it difficult? Charlene, did you put your hand up? Please. Oh, you're muted, Charlene. Sorry. Maybe we can unmute you so you're driving so it's easier.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just stopped. Um, to what you were saying, I have attended many few therapy sessions. I lost two children,
Mm.
2 and 22. And when I lost in the health system, even the doctors or the practitioners don't believe you when you tell them that your child is sick. That's the number one problem. So I have 4 children. My last one was not feeling well. I saw the symptoms. I couldn't understand why he wasn't eating. He always would take naps. I went back to the child. What do you call it again? The baby doctor.
Pediatrician?
Yes, the pediatrician. Explained my situation over and over. They shove you off. That's nothing happening. There's nothing real. It's okay. Go back and forth. So I said, no. My mom came with me. I walked with my 4 children. She says, my God, she has 4 children and she's telling you that this one child is not well. Anyhow, long story short, he decides to write me a requisition to go to the children's hospital. Therefore, I got the appointment. I went, I brought my son in. Within about 45 minutes to an hour, they came back to tell me what they found. He had a hole in his heart.
Jesus.
Right? So, like, wow. The sleepiness, the not eating, the appetite. He was only 2. He just turned 2 the 2 weeks before the diagnosis. Anyhow, they're telling me at that exact time that I have to give him a open heart surgery. I'm like, hey, I just came in to find out what's going on. I can't process what you're telling me. I got to let the father know and blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, they go, well, you got no choice. You got to give him got to go ahead and do the surgery. So anyhow, I go home. I explain to the child's father, this is what happened. What do you think? He goes, I don't know. I said, well, they had plans to go to Guyana. Long story short, they go, well, you won't be able to take him to Guyana because not with the hole in his heart. Now, if I was going to you for all these months to tell you there's something wrong and you're telling me it's like all up in my head, there's nothing wrong with this kid, until my mother intervened and said, my God, now you're telling me I have to assert a surgery. Anyhow, we went in that morning. I took pictures. I did everything, what every mother would do. They gave us the cleaning solution that you have to clean the child down and everything before he does this operation. When now he's going to do the operation, they forgot to take his blood work. So they don't know what blood he is. If he's O positive, he's O negative, nothing. Remind you now, he's been starving from a day before. He's 2 years of age. May 27th, I bring him in June 1st. So he had his birthday. He goes in to have his surgery. You forgot to take his blood work, prolong everything. He's whining, he's crying. He hasn't had nothing to eat the day before. He's 2. He's not an adult. Anyhow, they finally did the drawing of the blood. They got what he needed. They went into surgery at 7:30 in the night. Mind you, I'm there from since 6 in the morning. So 7:30, they proceed to do the surgery. 9 o'clock, 10, he came out. How did it go? It went well. Okay, fine. I go in and I see him. I put my gown on, blah, blah, blah. Came out, went home, got some more clothes. And I told my husband, my child's father, that everything went okay. Within a couple of hours, it was now the Friday he had the surgery, June 1st. The second was the Saturday. I said, something seems wrong. Oh, there's nothing wrong. So anyhow, the nurse that they had inside in the room there was touching another patient. I go, you're not washing your hands. You're like cross-contaminating. My son had open heart surgery, and now you're going to tend to him and you're touching the machines and this and that. I says, no, you got to wash your hands. You got to wash your hands. And they're looking at me, right? And they're like, who am I? I says, he can get sick. Oh, okay, don't worry, don't worry. So they pushed me aside again. Anyhow, I complained about it. They removed my son from the recovery room, from the ICU to another room just down the hall because I complained about the hand washing and everything. So that's the Saturday. I'm taking pictures. I have videos. He's in the next room. Then now, the Sunday, my mom comes from church. They're looking at him. He's developing, he's getting bigger. He's getting agitated. I said, something is wrong. There's nothing wrong. They took his monitoring and everything, this night. Oh, everything seems good. But it wasn't. I'm seeing something that's transitioning from the third day. Anyhow, it's like 10 o'clock, 11 at night. He's getting agitated. He's crying and I'm rocking him. And I said to myself, let me go use the toilet. So I went to use the toilet, but I didn't go use the toilet. I went to the phone and I called his father. I said, something is wrong with Isaiah. And they go, leave it in the hands of God. Because I go to church. I call my mother. I said the same thing. She says, leave it in the hands of God. By the time I walked back, it was around 11 o'clock. Isaiah looks at me, a beautiful 2-year-old, looks up and down, holds his hands out and goes into cardiac arrest. That was it. I ran out and said, cardiac arrest, cardiac arrest. They're looking at me like, wow, all of a sudden, how am I using these terms? I worked in a hospital. I worked for the Jewish General for 37 years. I worked in CSR where there's codes. I have to be the person who run with the crash carts to go to the floors. If it's code brown, if it's code black, I'm part of that team. So my dialect and what I knew, it didn't fit them. They're like, what the hell? How's she talking this type of talk? Again, you're looking at me, a regular person. Long story short, he goes into cardiac arrest. They say, what the hell happened? I say, you tell me. Anyhow, they told me to leave the room. I refused to leave the room. Anyhow, they reopened him. They did a jump start. They said, we got to put him on a heart and lung machine. I had to sign the papers. Then the doctors turned around to tell me, do you know how much this will cost the hospital to put him on And I'm like, what? This is the empathy. This is what they come out of their mouth. So for me to sign, they're telling me how much it would cost. I think around 12,000, whatever it was at that particular time. This is in 2001, right? And I signed the papers. They rush him back into the ICU, administer. It took about 6 hours to put him on the heart and lung machine, right? When you go there, you look like Robocop. He was just with all tubes and everything. I have pictures. I have everything. By 5 days later, I'm looking at him and I'm like, his body is getting bigger, but his head is shrinking. I go to them, I says, there's something wrong with my son. They're like, there's nothing wrong. I go, no. His head looks like a little raisin, a raisin that gets dried up, but the body's being pumped and working, getting bigger. Anyhow, long story short, they come, they look at my child, they say, get the doctors. The doctors come in, they close the curtains. I rip back the curtains. I says, no. So they decided to do to put him on an ECG. They did the regular routine, but they have the needle that they run up the foot. His foot didn't jump. It didn't react. Everything that was on the line was just like flat, nothing going up and down, no heartbeat, no nothing. Like because the machine was working for him. They go, we have to take him off the heart and lung machine. What took 7 hours took like 2 minutes to pull out every piece of wire. Anyhow, they rushed him downstairs. Couldn't go in the room. They did the scan. They came out just by the face. They said, I'm sorry. Your son is gone. June the 8th. Walked him in June the 1st. By June the 8th, he's gone. So I called my sister. I told her, tell the three children, the three boys, but don't say nothing, just take them out of school. I called my mom. I says, Mom, you guys got to come to the hospital. A few friends, and they came, and I said, you tell my family. And then they brought us to a room, and they told him that, I'm sorry, Isaiah's gone. And I had no words. Anyhow, we went in. I took pictures. The pastor came. Everybody was there. And my little son that was 3, because they were 11 months apart, and he came in the room and he said, my brother is dead. Like, everybody looked at him like, how would he know? Like, to say that, 3 years of age. Anyhow, I have his aunt lift him up, and he took a picture and kissed his brother on the bed. I have the pictures and everything. Anyhow, they said they were so sorry, everything like that. And my whole life had changed after that. I got a note from the hospital. They're sorry. Anyhow, within the hours, my parents left. I went in the room. They put me in a different room now. They made me hold him, and they took off the machine that was keeping him alive. And I have the last pictures of him passing on me. And I said, I want an autopsy. I did the autopsy, where they cut him from the head and everything. And they said, I routed it to the Jewish general, to one of the guys that does the morticians in the morgue. And he sat me down. I said, I don't understand all of this. Can you explain it to me? And he said, your son had suffered worse than an adult. He picked up an infection that went through his whole body to the brain. And I was like so hurt, because the child that was beside my son was an indigenous child, but he had an infection. And with the cross-contamination and people touching you, and your kids are vital, I keep telling them that. And I work with sterility. I know what it is to be clean, you understand? But it landed on deaf ears, so be it. And then I buried my son. But prior to that, working in the hospital and telling the doctors and human resources that I'm going to need some time off. My son is having an open surgery, a heart surgery, and even the human resources, not human resources, the staff doctor, health, sorry about that, the doctors that give you when you got time off or you go sick, he turned around and told me, oh, you don't need no time off, blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking at me, he says, am I the only person that can't get 3 days off to tend to my son getting an open heart surgery? Anyhow, whether he took it, gave it to me or not, legally, I called in sick, was there with my son. And then when I came back to him, I came back to show him that my son is dead. And he looked at me. And then he wrote me off as long as I needed to be off. So you see, even no matter where you work, they judge you as always being hard. You don't have feelings, like you're a robot. Like, you know what I mean? We're treated kind of different, you know? So anyhow, I got the time off. He passed and everything. And I had to deal with a lot of personal stuff and trying to get answers. I never got answers. But he died horridly. And then going back to work, they said, you got to go see a psychologist to see if you're good enough to come back to work. And I don't know if it was routine, but I had to. And then on the second death of my son, who got murdered, he was 22, they told me I had to go see the psychologist to come back to work. And I'm like, I don't know if it's mandatory. So when I had another lady that was upstairs, she says, not really. Like, maybe if you a person that calls in sick every time, I'm there every day. But this happened. So I don't know how the system works. So a lot of people don't talk about a lot of things among people because we're not heard. But I'm addressing this. I'm putting it out there. And it's more than one account. Even when you're physically sick, they don't believe you. Like, literally. So those two are two children that passed, and me being sick also, going to doctors in the hospital, having surgeries. Even with one of the doctors who did my surgery, he had brain cancer. Nobody knew he was getting dementia and did my surgery and forgot to come back to me after the surgery. I spent a month
Charlene,
in the hospital. So a lot of things that you see happen to people, people don't really talk about it.
Charlene, thank you for sharing such personal
Yeah.
stories of not being heard. And I just want to make sure Khan has a chance to respond
Mhm.
to the issues you've raised. They're so important.
My response can't do justice to what you shared. So, like, I know sorry and condolences don't mean enough. I'll just briefly, there's a couple points I want to say. One is, I had a similar experience with my older brother. So my brother had a condition called pyloric stenosis, where my mom went around in the first 4 weeks of his life, and no doctor would listen to her and say that something was wrong. And then finally, one doctor took a look at my brother and was like, he needs to go into surgery right away, and it saved his life. And my 4-month-old son just had the same condition. And so beyond that, though, but it's horrible that how what I'm trying to say gets emphasized by your story and your tragedy, but it's a really important thing that you shared because it talks about like a history of a fractured and strained relationship between the Black community and the healthcare community, and we are a part of that. And so when I talk about the idea of like of broaching or bringing up those topics, it's also understanding that for different reasons, stories like Charlene's are all too common within our community, and there's a lack of trust. There isn't the same inherent trust that other communities will have in terms of moving towards our services. And so, for everything in terms of whether it's the invalidation, not being believed, not feeling seen or heard, not feeling respected, like a lot of that comes in or is carried in directly or vicariously with what your Black clients would experience. And if you understand historically and contextually what they're coming in with, I think again, you understand as well as the importance of showing that the relationship with us and the experience subsequently that they'll have can be different. And one of the biggest ways to do that is not just making them feel heard, but it's also how you show the willingness to facilitate exploration in certain areas, and how you, and by doing that, you show that this can be different. This doesn't have to be a perpetuance of what so many of us have experienced, and that contrary to what we've been shown or experienced, that this can be safe and in its own way can be corrective and healing. And listen, that's not to say, Charlene, that my words in any way, shape, or form kind of address your pain or what you've gone through. And like, I'm trying to stay composed emotionally. But first, thank you for sharing because I do think it's a really big piece, and it's something that we do need to understand, and why I think this topic is so important. So um, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry you had to go through that, but I really appreciate your willingness to share that today, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna do my best. Um, okay, so you can all see my screen again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'll get into in terms of the reasons to um, why it can be difficult. So this talks about the professionals or the clinicians as a whole, and these are some of the more documented and researched reasons as to why. And when you take a look at some of those reasons, or you take a look at the screen, what I think is important is you'll notice that for some of the reasons, it's like fear of raising emotionally charged issues, shame or lack of knowledge or complicitness in systems of oppression, concern about saying something offensive, not knowing when and how to address it, waiting for clients to initiate the discussion. Some of those reasons point to, in some ways, the professional centering themselves in terms of whether or not it's their own comfort, or whether or not they feel they have the ability, or whether or not they feel that it might allow them, it might cause them to be seen in a way that is either offensive or racist or negative. And to this, I would say, look, I've heard a lot of people say that I don't broach the topic of race, whether it's a fear of how they're going to be perceived or whether they feel it's going to be othering or divisive. And to that, I say there's no separation of the experiences of race and what that means in the lived experience, in the lives and the lived experiences of your Black clients. And so, no matter whether it is the presenting issue, we understand that we ask a lot of questions that allow us to have a complete and comprehensive understanding of our clients. You can establish that without talking to them and broaching these topics. For fear of erasing emotionally charged issues, I not in a not in a mocking way, but it makes me laugh because I'm just like, but that is the entirety of our work. That is the nature of our work. And so, for anybody, without calling you out, who feels that that might speak to you, I think it's important to ask yourself, if you understand that there is no doing clinical work without raising emotionally charged issues, then, and you understand that and have applied that, why does it become an exception or a difference when it's the issue of race? And I think that's something very important to reflect on and why, and what is your relationship and subsequent comfort with that topic. Some of it speaks to a lack of cultural competence or feeling that they don't want to be seen as ignorant or racist. They don't want to create harm. By not broaching, you're creating harm. By not broaching, you are probably most likely coming off as ignorant or racist. Even if it's trying to protect the client, you're not protecting the client. And a lot of the reasons very much relate back um, to the therapist, to the clinician, or the health professional as a whole. Um, some of the reasons speak to a lack of experience and familiarity, and then the subsequent comfort or language around how to talk about these topics. Um, Now, I will kind of explain that a lot of this information, a lot of the research specifically looks at cross-racial dyads, but between Black clients and white passing health professionals or clinicians. One, because of the makeup of the field in and of itself, but two, because the stats that I gave in terms of early termination rates or experiences of racism, discrimination, or microaggressions most often occur and the vast majority are when working with a white or white passing clinician. Part of that is also borne by the fact that statistically research has shown that white or white passing individuals on average have less conversations about race and racism, less experiences, less opportunities to develop that language and the comfort, whether for different reasons, whether it's not talked about social location or for some individuals not feeling like the topic of race pertains to them. That race, that whiteness is the default, and everybody else are those who are racialized. Dr. Jarvis, it looked like you're trying to say something. Sorry.
Oh no, this is really, I'm just listening to what you're saying. There was a comment in the chat, a question
Oh,
from
for sure.
Sabiha. Can you give us examples how to approach the topic of racism if we're not ourselves from a black background? How can we approach, how would you suggest that we approach it?
So I'm okay. So yeah, in the next two slides, I'm exactly going to get to that. It's an excellent question. I think the first thing is understanding that regardless of how you identify, we are all racialized individuals. And I think, and part of it that you'll see is talks about also as well that what influences someone's ability or willingness to broach. So I'm going to get to that also for the sake of time. Some of the other reasons, not wanting to be seen as racist or ignorant, avoiding discomfort for themselves and the client, feeling a certain level of trust must be developed beforehand. And to that one specifically, I would say, oftentimes your ability to build that strong relationship with your client, as well as the trust, can actually be largely facilitated by your ability and willingness to broach the topics. Waiting for the right, perfect or natural organic moment, or being concerned about anger or rage within their clients as well. So I'll move along. And then reasons for why it could be difficult for your Black clients. I talked about the racial socialization process. Therapy might not be a safe place to discuss race. What you represent, and then the subsequent biases that may trigger in your client. And then it also be that your clients might also feel that you're unable or unwilling to broach those topics, and they might actually be trying. to protect you as well. Oftentimes, the research shows that Black clients will compartmentalize for the sake of preserving the therapeutic or professional relationship and also to create a certain level of comfort for their therapist. And also, a lot of your Black clients have been racially socialized that the way to navigate this society and to maintain their wellness, well-being, and ability for success is to make those, in particular, white or white passing individuals, feel comfortable and safe around us and our Blackness. So I'm going to get Sabia, I'm going to get to, just for the sake of time, um, what you asked. So, just quickly with the definition, broaching the counselor's ability to consider the relationship of racial and cultural factors to the client's presenting problem. Broaching behaviors refer to a regular and ongoing attitude of openness with authentic commitment by the counselor to continually invite the client to explore issues of diversity. So, um, I'll move ahead to Savia's question and then I'll come back. But essentially, this talks about a continuum of broaching behaviors. Um, just give me a sec, Savia. Okay. So, Savia, I think this is directly what speaks to you. When you talk about the idea of like how and when can you broach, for me, the most important or immediate ways to broach the topics of race in no particular order, asking your clients how they identify racially. No matter how obvious it may seem to you, the importance and the value of actually asking how they identify racially. Asking as well, how do they identify how do you identify culturally? Like a lot for a lot of your clients, they would have been raised in a certain culture by also the intersectionality of Western or Canadian culture. And so, how do you identify racially? How do you identify culturally? What's your willingness to discuss issues of race, racism, and discrimination with you? It acknowledges and shows your understanding of the fact that it is a sensitive issue for your clients and centers their well-being and empowers them in giving them authorship and control appropriately of whether or not they feel that they're ready to go there. Asking them how salient or how salient is the issue of race or racism relative to your presenting issues. So opening it up and showing that you understand, even though it's not explicitly written in, let's say, an intake form or referral that you've received for different reasons, because that may be risky for your clients, you showing that you have a willingness and an ability to engage and to broach can sometimes be the most powerful elements of the foundation of your therapeutic or professional relationship. You're showing your Black clients that you're different. You're different from what they've encountered, and despite what their biases may be, that you're safe. And they have no way of knowing that unless you explicitly put it out there and put it on the table. Talking to them about previous experiences of race or racism, and then primarily the proverbial elephant in the room, explicitly addressing the fact that there is a difference in race and subsequent culture, right? By addressing that, you are acknowledging it, you are showing a comfort, but what it also can allow you to do is demonstrate to the client that you understand that because therapy or that professional relationship is a microcosm of society, that the fact that there's a cross-racial dyad can actually influence the entire therapeutic alliance and process, as well as what it is that they are or are not willing to say. Sabia, does that answer your question? I can't see, so hopefully if you nod or share something in the chat.
She says yes, very much. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
my pleasure. Okay, so I'll just quickly go back to what I passed over. Um, Sorry? Okay, I'll just quickly go back over what I passed over. So this takes a snapshot of different levels and stages of broaching behavior within clinicians. So you see Avoidant, isolating, and the continuing incongruent on the screen. For the avoidant, oftentimes it's a result of clinicians or professionals not taking the time to do the work. And when I say do the work, doing the work is taking the time to build a relationship with yourself and for self-reflection and understanding. What are my attitudes? What are my beliefs? What are my values? What are my subsequent biases? And how are they or may they show up in the room and influence my work in general, or specifically with my Black clients, and influence my ability and my willingness to broach? Um, Oftentimes, as well, in the avoidant, it could be that for clinicians, they don't see themselves as part of conversations of race if they are white or white passing, or they might solely focus on clients broaching these topics without one addressing the cross-racial dyad and how it influences the process of therapy, or acknowledging their own racial identity and the subsequent privilege that comes with it. The isolating level is the most common level for professionals and clinicians. So, in this level, there is a desire or an attempt to protect the client and the professional themselves from any feelings of discomfort. There is an attempt to protect the professional specifically from coming off as ignorant or racist, which I explained before. By not broaching, you oftentimes end up creating that very same reality that you were trying to avoid. Broaching is seen far more as an isolated technique or intervention, and individuals at this level oftentimes overestimate the, not the value, overestimate the efficiency or the benefits of their broaching technique and how appropriate or useful or helpful it is. For the continuing congruent, it shifts broaching from looking more as an isolated skill, and there still may be some discomfort in discussing the topics. As you move along the continuum for the integrated congruent and the infusing. Congruent is where ideally health professionals start to see and understand that Black individuals in the community don't exist as a monolith, and there is a great deal of diversity without even getting into intersectionality. And at this level, and this is why it is important for us to broach, there is the ability and willingness to help the client explore potential connections between their presenting issues and societal or systemic or institutional issues. In order to be right, what I often explain to professionals and when I give this presentation is that why it's so important, not just the cultural competence, but as well the willingness to approach. Our job oftentimes is to build bridges and connections of understanding and insight that our clients won't come to, whether they're hesitant and unwilling or because they don't see it, which also includes the ways in which what they're dealing with might connect to bias, discrimination, systemic oppression, and or racism. And that cannot be facilitated without your willingness and ability to approach and to broach effectively. And that comes back to our duty and our responsibility. And finally, the infusing is the highest level where it's not just what you enact professionally with your clients, it's also a way of being and your life. And so this very much partners and mirrors allyship in that sense, not doing it for the sake of the Black community, doing it because you need to exist, behave, and work in alignment with your values and your character. And what I would add to that, we're not going to go into the details. Um, we're not going to go into the details of this chart. What I want to explain by this chart shows, and research has supported this, and again, specifically for white or white passing clinicians, that their willingness and ability to broach and approach effectively coincides with their own racial identity development. And that's also really important. When I do this full training, I talk about the idea, and one of the things that I start about is before you even meet your clients or acquire skill or knowledge, you have to do the work. The work is the self-reflection, the checking of biases, attitudes, beliefs, values, and attitudes. If you don't do that, no matter how much information I throw your way or anybody else, there's no way of knowing of whether or not how you currently exist might prevent you from properly absorbing or internalizing that information and then appropriately and effectively applying it with your clients, right? We need to do the work to prepare ourselves to be open and to be a receptacle for that knowledge and then subsequently apply it, if that makes sense to individuals. So, for the sake of time, because I'm trying to be mindful of that, um, I'm going to go towards examples of broaching language because I think this is something will be really important for people. And what I will say is that if Dr. Jarvis or Lynn is willing to help me with that without putting you on the spot, I will send these examples to them so that people, if they feel this is important, you have that. What I need to tell you though, before that, this is not designed to be your voice, the things that I'm sharing. It is nothing more than to give you an example or a template for you to work with to find your own words. Because if it doesn't come off as genuine or authentic, it'll all be for naught and it won't work. So some of these words of this language might work for you, but it is important stylistically, personality wise, you have to find an authentic and genuine way of your own language relative to broaching. So asking about racial or ethnic identities. One way I like to get to know my patients is by asking about some of their identities. An important identity for many of my clients is race or ethnicity. This is a really good way of showing that it is a standardized approach, which again, I think creates a sense of trust and safety for your Black clients. And for anyone who's concerned about othering them, again, the two things that I say is we are othered. We just are different. There's no way around that. But beyond that, by standardizing it, this is a way to kind of minimize that concern. Would you feel comfortable talking about your racial and ethnic background? The importance of exploring while giving them the opportunity and the choice to decline or to accept. It's really important for me to build as complete of an understanding of my clients as possible in order to provide them with the best possible care and support and offer suggestions, advice, interventions that reflect who they are. Because I don't like to make any assumptions, I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to share with me how do you identify racially and ethnically? Moving along. So for initiating conversations about race, I know we haven't talked, I know we haven't talked a lot I know we haven't talked a lot or haven't previously talked about race or racism in our sessions, and I apologize for not having created opportunities to do so or clearly indicated my willingness to. That being said, I wanted to ask about your thoughts, feelings, and or comfort with discussing it during our sessions. Very quickly, this is the reason why I put this one in as well, is that a lot of clinicians or professionals who've had this presentation will admit that it's not something that they readily did with their clients. This demonstrates that it is an ongoing process. And even if you didn't start that way, at any point, introducing it with your clients will have immense value. And I will argue will not just solidify and reinforce, but allow the relationship and the subsequent work to grow in ways that never would have been possible without introducing it. With everything that's been going on recently, identify specific events. There are a lot of people who have had difficult emotions or experiences triggered, and I wanted to check in to see, check in with you and to see how you were doing, and if you wanted to take some time to talk about it. As it mentions in the comment, this is also about the importance of world events. So I shared my story about George Floyd. There are always a plethora of ongoing world events that are occurring. It's not necessarily about my telling you that you need to be up to date and aware of all of them. But if you are, there is value for making space because it could be directly or indirectly impacting your clients. A great example is looking at everything that happens and continues to happen in the US and our neighbors to the south, if you will. A lot of your Black clients are going to have family and or friends who exist there. And so as I explained, it's not just the direct experience, but vicariously as well, those events and the impact on the community can also have an impact on your client. And this touches back to the nature of racial trauma. And one of the ways in which it is enacted and transmitted is through vicarious experience. Furthermore, exploring how race may affect the therapeutic relationship. So I wanted to take a moment to address the fact that you're a Black man, woman, person working with you name who you are. man, woman persons as your therapist and create an opportunity for us to talk about what that is or might be like for you, and if you feel it could get in the way of our relationship and subsequent work. And then things to avoid, suggesting that you can fully understand the experiences of your client, which I think we all understand have been coached not to do in general, no matter how our clients identify. Insisting that your client discuss issues of race, racism, or culture with you. You have to be willing to accept the fact that they might put up a wall and say no. And that's okay, because it still means that they're comfortable enough in the room and have enough ownership to set that boundary. And that is also really important, and acknowledging that. And then as well, displaying an overly intense interest in your client's race-based experiences, right? Like you don't want to put this spotlight and make it all about like they're nourishing your lack of information or knowledge about this and kind of making it into like this big performance or show. Like your ability to convey importance and value in what they're saying, but also in a way that normalizes it, I think will also be imperative to your work with your Black clients. Okay. So, it's an abridged version of what I usually kind of talk about just because there's a lot more engagement and back and forth as well. But for the sake of this presentation and the time, I felt like I took the essential aspects, including the language of the topic of broaching race and racism with your Black clients, and put it in today's presentation. So I hope this was kind of eye-opening or maybe reinforcing if you're already doing the work, or even if it just generated way more questions. That's still good because there's a thirst for knowledge in the acquisition of it. So I will stop talking. Um, I'm not, if anybody wants to kind of ask questions or learn more, or to share any of their experiences, by all means, it'd be welcome. I'm cognizant of the time. So yeah.
Thank you very much. And because it was so interactive, we are somewhat over time, but we could take
Sorry.
one question. No, it was a good way to talk about these issues. I think it's better to be interactive and have people share. And if anybody has one question, we could take one question at this time for Khan.
Or if my email shared, you can always like reach out to me directly. I'm always open and willing.
Hey, if you could share those slides with us, that'd be really nice too.
Okay. Maybe
Final
oh, there's
Schnell Garçon.
Sorry, I can't see well how to raise my hand, so I'll just pop in there.
Sure.
So, thank you so much for your presentation. It was amazing. It was very revealing, and my question is to obviously I'm Black, so it resonates
Mm.
very much to me. I would like to know, would you say that the recommendations that you've presented could also apply to other ethnicities, First
absolutely.
Nations, Hispanic, etc.?
Absolutely. So like a lot of, yeah, it's an excellent question. A lot of like what I shared today pertains to communities of color, racialized communities as well. Some of it can even overlap with in terms of ethnic or ethnic minorities when you really talk about like the cultural piece, how they culturally identify um, issues of marginalization or oppression or discrimination. And what's been really nice is I've received feedback from the training where a lot of the participants have said, like, even though I'm not seeing a plethora of Black clients, or I haven't seen some in the time that we've gone through the training, they said, I'm using it across the board with different communities, and they feel that, and they're noticing as well that the just asking the question and how kind of like it opens things up, or like the subtle shifts in body language, tonality, energy with their clients, they're really noticing that it's having a significant impact, and they're also noticing it as well when compared with previous work that there's certain avenues or streams of conversation, narratives, what they're learning that wasn't occurring in previous clinical or professional experience because for different reasons, without vilifying anybody, they weren't doing it, right? This isn't normalized information. This isn't when I ask people about this information who take the training, like no one raises their hand of like, I've seen this before. So for the most part, so yes, you can definitely take a lot of this issues of sense of belonging as well, and apply it to different communities that have like an appropriate overlap in terms of shared experiences within the society. Absolutely.
I think we could extend it to religious minorities as well,
Mhm.
for example. Well, I want to just say to all the clinicians that this is something we have to practice. We have to be courageous. We have to put ourselves forward. We have to broach these topics in sensitive, appropriate ways. We'll feel more comfortable the more we do it, and we'll learn how to work with our diverse patients and clients.
May I add something? Sorry, doctor.
Absolutely.
So just really like one last line. I apologize so much for interrupting you.
Oh, no problem.
The thing that I didn't add, so I talked about the importance of it being authentic and comfortable. In the same way, therapy is a microcosm of society. What I always encourage participants to do is like, do not contain this to your clinical or professional lives. If you really want to adopt like this natural, organic way and this comfort of doing it and how that applies, just think about how much of who you are is imprinted in the way in which you work with people. And if you take these steps in your personal life, to me, that is arguably the best and most enriching way to normalize it, make it comfortable, and then organically or naturally have it transition into the work that you do. Sorry.
Oh, that's perfect. That means we have to extend ourselves and make friends and contacts with people from all over, and we can develop better comfort levels, I think, and better skills too. Social skills. It's a social skill, really,
Mhm.
for clinicians. So this is really crucial. Thank you. We're going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for coming to us today, Bouba. We really learned a lot, and I think everybody wants to continue learning more.